All right, welcome to episode 23 of Real Estate Chat with
Johnder Perez.
and Robert Eid. Welcome. And it's going to be an interesting episode because we spent just the last half hour talking about it and how to approach it, because it's not a usual episode where we're reading a headline or going through charts. I mean, we will be talking about charts in this episode, but I have a certain perspective. And I want to ask Robert is if my perspective is valid, if it's the way I should be looking at things, if it's the way everybody should be looking at things, or is there more than one thing to consider when looking at it from this perspective? And this was sort of the idea behind this episode was sort of spurred by some of the comments that we received in a previous real estate chat. You can watch our previous episodes. Make sure you like and subscribe. And it's about, for lack of a better term, real estate haters. And I don't know why there's a profound existence of real estate haters, because, for one thing, Robert and I, yes, we are licensed, registered, insured practitioners with years of experience. Robert, of course, have many more years of experience than I do. And, we don't use this platform to, per se, for lack of a better word, we're not selling anything other than ideas, other than sharing ideas and concepts about real estate. And some of the comments are more about, and I'll admit I took it a bit personally, but don't buy now. Real estate agents are telling you it's always the right time to buy. And so I look at that perspective and I wonder, when you look at historical data, when you look at statistics, when you look at past experience and past people you've interacted with, was there ever a right or wrong time to buy? And is there a certain right way of looking at this perspective? Is my perspective of looking at it the right thing or the wrong thing? I'm going to let Robert be critical of how I look at it. And we're going to start with this screen here. And usually Robert's charts are very detailed, very, particular about what it's showing. I'm kind of just, I'm going to start the show this way, Robert.
Yeah.
If this was an average price chart for real estate prices, which I took off the year and I took off the prices, but this is based on actual data, not inflated data, no inflation factored in, but this is just straight up average price. We saw a peak happen right about here. And we're seeing a little bit of a dip happen right about here. I'm going to ask Robert this question. Robert, would you buy at this point?
My standard answer is, when you're buying something, you're buying one house, not a market. And when you're buying something for your own use, for your family, for your future, you're not buying it for 5 minutes. You're buying it to live in for 5 years, 15 years. You have a longer time horizon than an investor, a non-owner occupied buyer would be. Now, timing the market is impossible. People only buy when they have the money, they have the inclination, and it seems like the right thing to do. That if you've ever been in a situation where you've lost your home, okay, you were renting something and they wanted to smash it down, and you're renting something and it's just not big enough, or the owner wants to move back into it, whatever the reason is, you've lost your home, not your choosing. Now you've got to make a decision. So now you decide, do I rent again or do I buy again? So at this falling off the peak, let's say that's the time when you're at this compelled to make a decision moment. So now you go and look around and say, okay, I make this amount of money. Everybody else in my family makes this amount of money. Combined together, we go into the XYZ lender and they say we can buy a house for, pick a number, $728,000. And we've got enough down payment to qualify to make the $728,000 purchase price work. Can we buy what we want in terms of size of house, type of house, construction of house, neighborhood of house, garage, parking, nothing, school, at that money? And at that money, if we can't buy it, can we get it for just maybe paying a little bit more? Or do we have to move to, instead of being in North York, do we have to move to Pickering? Do we have to move to Aurora? Do we have to move to Mr. and Mississauga? So that's when you're compelled. And if that's the point and you're compelled, then you say, since I'm only buying one house, I'm going to find somebody who wants to sell really bad. and I'm going to give him a lousy offer. And if he takes it, I'm a winner. So there's
Awesome.
your,
Great answer. So in short, if I were to summarize that, well, I mean, it's yes or no, right? It's always going to be yes or no. And if you were at this point, and let's say this was today, let's hypothetically say it was today, you go through Robert's, list of things to consider. And if the answer is yes, then you've bought. And then maybe after that, prices sunk even further. Let's say you didn't buy though. And then several years later, this is what you see. So this was the first point. And you bought, let's say you bought, great. You didn't buy. Now you're at this point. So Robert, we saw another peak, then another dip. Would you buy at this point now? Or is it the same answer as you just previously given?
okay. Well, the other half of the answer to the question that you posed before was, if it's an optional purchase, the other one was compelled. Okay. If you're compelled, then you either have to rent another something or buy something. And we found it through a series of questions that we could find something that was in a convenient location at a budget we could afford and be approved for the mortgage. And so we did it. Now, if we couldn't find something at the price, then we would not have bought, and we would have waited. And we would have waited either for interest rates to go down, up, prices to go down, up, our needs to change, our number of children to increase, decrease, the number of parents living with us to increase, decrease. And then again, you're going to come to a point where you've got to make a decision because you're uncomfortable, not because you're getting banged over the head, but you're uncomfortable with the circumstances you're in. So again, your question was, if you didn't buy at the previous peak and you waited all this time, you have to ask the question, what were you doing? Were you living in your parents' basement? Were you renting at $4,000 a month? Were you, the possibilities are limitless. If you ask me the question again for the same person, then that person, I hope they saved a lot of money in their bank account from their earnings, because if they didn't, then they're just that much further away from now being compelled to buy than they decided not to buy in the previous.
Right, because this could have been a time span of 5, 10, 15, 20 years or more, which we're going to find out in a bit.
For that much difference in price, it would have to be.
We're going to find out what that time difference is. And the point with this, and the reason why I did this, and Robert and I were kind of talking about, hey, how do we present or how do we package it? Mostly like, why do it this way? Is that we're all looking at this right edge here. And this is all we see today, right? So the first chart, that's what we saw today, but now that's years, decades ago. This is what we see today, but now this is a couple years ago. And so here's what we see today again, right? So the first chart that I showed was 1990, 1991. The second was in the 2017, you all remember that, not too distant past, 2017, 2018. And we're looking at it here again today, 2022, 2023. And I'm going to drive Robert crazy, but I'm going to ask him the same question. But before I get to that, I'm going to share with you a couple of personal things. And as much as real estate chat, we try to be as intimate as possible. My parents bought their home in 1991. And in 1991, the average price is hovering at the 200s. They bought their home for $210,000. Now, we were renting, like my parents were renting up until that point. To get a $210,000 mortgage, I know they're going to be watching this one day, they had to combine incomes with my aunts. And I looked at the title this morning of how they were able to do that. And several years later, they eventually ended up buying the entire share out. And then my aunts and other family members ended up buying their own properties, as is in the case with many families that are from out of the country, immigrant families coming into Canada, you combine resources. So this is one of those stories. But they had bought in 1991, just before, we're actually right during prices dropping. And that's what we're going to see in Robert's better explanation of this later on. What I'm showing you is just a linear price graph with nominal figures. This doesn't even factor into inflation, which Robert will talk about later on. But they held on from 1991 amidst price drop. Now, keep in mind, inflation makes this even more exaggerated, but they held on. They recently sold, well, 2 years ago, they sold for $885,000 in 2020. That represents, if you're just looking at straight line, what that means every year, non-compounded, that's about 11% over 29 years of gains, in spite of the fact that there were dropping prices. Now, I myself, my wife and I bought our first property, a condominium, in 2008. 2008, you don't really see it on this. Like you remember, many of you remember it as the global financial crisis and all that sort of
Yeah.
stuff. But 2008, we bought for 245. And prices, like interest rates back then, not as high as they are, let's say today, but they were not as cheap as it was last year, let's say 2022. We eventually sold in 2020 and we realized a gain of about 8.67%, not as much as my parents did on a detached freehold property, but the TREB average you're looking at is about 7% since the 1976, 1977, since we've been tracking these numbers,
I mean,
right?
per year though, Johnder, right? Per year.
Per year, and just
Average
straight
per
line, not non-compounded, just per year. If you took the
Yeah,
number of
yeah,
years divided by the gain,
yeah,
of course,
yeah.
if you're compounding it, it's different. But the point that I'm trying to make, and then we're going to get into Robert's analysis of this situation. The point that I'm trying to make is this: nobody knows where the price is going to go after this. Could it be like in the 90s that Robert's going to show you exactly how many years you would have had to take to actually break even because of inflation? So many of you looking at this chart right now, let's call this late 80s, and then let's call this about early, just before 2005. It's not, I mean, this just shows it this way, but if you're looking at it on an inflation adjusted chart, it actually took a lot longer for you to break even, right? But my question to Robert, and then he's going to go into with his brilliant analysis, is, when we're looking at these charts and we're seeing that peak 2022, 2017, 19, like 1889 to 1990s, then we see a drop. And then everybody's saying, don't buy, prices are still going to drop. Sit on the sidelines, just wait, prices are still going to drop, interest rates are still rising. You'd be crazy to buy a home now. Are those individuals missing a prime opportunity to buy? Is there a right time to actually enter the market? Or is it, as long as we have a long-term point of view, is it literally, and I hate to sound salesy, but is the saying that any time is a good time to buy necessarily true? Let's go to Robert. I'm going to put up your chart on the screen and give us the answer, please, Robert.
Okay, well, this overly complex chart is the same graph as what Johnder had there with none of the embroidery on it, showing the nominal price. You can see it sort of in blue there, going up and down and then up and then jig jog, jig jog. Now, when you adjust for inflation, that tells you from now using common year dollars, but the expression that Johnder was saying, they bought it in 91 and then took them this long to break even. That's how an owner thinks, because they have a mortgage based on when they bought it. And then they've been paying it off, paying it off, paying it off every month. And that's what the amortization schedule, blended monthly payment of principal and interest, is all about. It's a forced saving. You are paying it off. You stay there for 10 years, you've paid off a good chunk. And so that when you sell, your equity is increased, yes, by appreciation, but by principal reduction. Now, the question is so complicated that there's no yes or no answer if we're trying to address what to do right now. Where in this chart that I'm showing is from the peak, you're off by 22.1%. That's a January result. And should you consider buying a property at that time? There are some people who think that I'm going to say in Toronto, 2/3 of the way through the correction. Now, this is a stock market term. It's got nothing to do with anything. If prices go up too much because there's huge amount of demand from investors as well as owner occupiers, because they're buying based on ridiculously low interest rates of 1% to 3%, that's a government policy that will never be seen again, has never been seen before, then that was an artificial blip. That price that went up, it went up too high. As I've got pointing, you see two big black arrows on here. It says maybe the 2% stress test should have been implemented here rather than whole economy killing rise in interest rates. And the other one, maybe number 2, January the 1st, 23, prohibition on non-Canadians buying residential may have been implemented here too. If they'd done both of those things, then it would have discouraged a lot of spec buying, non-owner occupied buying, and so that less demand would have pushed it up to not as far. Now the question is, what do you do now? We said this in a broadcast a few weeks ago. Depends on your situation, but I think it's actually comes down to the same thing in all cases. You have to do what suits you. If you're, because you're in a current situation, you're renting a bungalow with a basement apartment, you've got somebody downstairs that you're paying 3,000 and they're paying you 1,000, so you're paying 2,000, but you haven't got the run of the whole place. You've got their noise, you've got neighbors next door that you don't like the parking situation. You're not crazy about, you've got your existing situation. Maybe you're in a beautiful 2-bedroom rent controlled apartment. You're paying $1,423 and you can just stay there forever. So you have to decide, do you want to continue what you're doing? And inertia is the strongest force in nature to do nothing. Or do I want to take a plunge? Now, if you take a plunge, you've now got a choice, because now you'll say, okay, I made an offer, and based on the interest rate that we've negotiated, my monthly payments will increase by 22.5%, to pick a number, from what my rent is now. But I know my rent is way too low. It's taking all of my savings, but I'm investing my savings into a house that I like. And if he accepts it, I've got a package that I want. I would rather be living there with those enjoyable factors at that increased cost and with those increased benefits. I'm now a homeowner. I'm this. So there it is. You've got a choice between doing what you're doing now or buying something, but you're buying one thing and its costs compared to the cost of doing nothing and what you're doing right now.
And so basically it's like, let's say in the 1990s, my parents didn't buy that home, they rented. And let's say, for example, they even bought at the same price here later on. So let's say, for example, you were lucky enough that during that era, you bought at the same price. What is it, 10, 20 years later, Robert, it works out to be like about 21 years later. It's essentially the same.
Inflation adjusted scale, yes.
Yeah, then you would have sat on equity gains anyway, right? From that point on up to there. But Robert put out a key important point, the equity, right? The equity pay down over all of those years, the fact that you're secure, like we weren't kicked out for 29 years of this house. So my parents choose to sell it because they were downsizing, and I had long moved out already since then.
And they paid off the mortgage.
And they paid off the mortgage. Exactly. And they paid off the mortgage, right? So if you're sitting there and you're renting right now and you foresee that the next 10, 20 years, you're still going to be renting, hey, that's your decision. That's completely okay if that's what you're comfortable with. What really, I guess, triggered me with some of the thinking in the previous episode comments is that, and we welcome your comments by all means. And this is what inspires and creates these episodes. And I put a challenge on the viewer that made this comment, is like 5, 10, 20 years from now, watch this episode, watch that previous episode. And it's not Robert and I being fortune future tellers or having a crystal ball. It's just pure, I don't know what you call it. It's pure mathematics. It's pure economics. It's pure real estate is inflationary. The environment that we operate in, there's inflation, there's deflation, there's adjustments, there's government policies, all of that sort of stuff that I'm not going to get into. That's not even my expertise, but because of just what's around us. And I'm going to go to this chart next from Robert, just because of what's around us, real estate will go up. It's not because of it's not like you created a startup company and because of your ingenuity, the stock went up and the prices went up and the valuation of it went up and all that sort of stuff. Real estate will always go up, provided these current conditions we're in continue to prevail, not because you're special and you bought a house and you picked it out and it was a great buy. It's just the way it is, for lack of a better explanation. Robert, maybe you can come up with a better explanation than how I worded it.
Well, how you worded it was good for you. How I say it is like accountants say it. Lease what depreciates, buy what appreciates. Simple. And a house is accommodation. It provides you with shelter. It provides you with security of tenure. You can't get kicked out. You can't get expropriated. You get a chance to pick your neighbors. But you choose a neighborhood surrounding you of people that you'd like to be with rather than people you would like not to be with. And as we've referred to a couple of times, it's a forced savings that over 25-year amortization, no matter what the rates go up or down, you've paid that darn thing off. And so now you've got an asset that you can either refinance, you can do a equity takeout, you can do a, what do they call these? Not a home equity.
Home equity line of credits, is that? Reverse mortgage?
grandma puts a mortgage on it to
reverse mortgage.
reverse mortgage.
Yeah.
You can do a lot of things when you have that equity built up. However, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about how can we guess the future and know that we're not doing something dumb. Now, Johnder's parents is a perfect example because the chart that we've got here was suggested by Robert Hogue, except he didn't do it quite as well. He wasn't able to do it monthly. He wasn't able to do real data, and he used national data quarterly and just for a few quarters either side of the peak. But he came up with the idea of the common peak. So you can see where they're all congealed in the middle. Everything is 100% there. A few months before, a few months going out. There's a long straightly out thing that shows that prices really didn't go up in Toronto Real Estate Board numbers, for like 7 years. It just dragged out from that peak in 1990, way, just did nothing. But that's the time that Johnder was talking about. You know, that's 7 years. Most people think that's a long time. His folks stayed there for 29 years. My mother sold her house a little while ago, 4 years ago. She stayed there for 61 years. We all grew up there and we're all old now. Anyway, so it's a different time horizon. The people who are criticizing are these, what are the results of the earnings per share in the next quarter mentality. They're in a different business and they're trying to say, give me your investment money rather than buying a condo. Give me your money and I'll invest it in the jiggery poker that I am selling. And anyway, so I won't go on about the stock and bond market hating real estate, but those are the ones who are the haters. The haters are also the people that got burned last time. Now, why did they get burned? Because they were greedy. They didn't have a prudent plan. They were greedy. Now, do I know everything? No, but I've watched it a few times. So it could be that the real estate prices in Toronto, let's say $1 million is where the price is right now for an average. Maybe it's going to stay there and go flat for 7 years. Might be. But if you bought a house tomorrow or yesterday and paid $1 million for it and didn't want to sell it for 10 years, you wanted your kids to go to school and to high school and everything, you'd pay off the mortgage. Interest rates would go down a little bit, then they come up a little bit. You'd pay around 4 or 5% for the whole darn time. And by the end of the time, you've paid off half of it. Now you can decide what you want to do. Do you want to move to Northwest Territories? Do you want to move to Florida? Do you want to move to New Brunswick? Do you want to move to Calgary? What do you want to do? You're flexible. So security of tenure and what it does to your credit rating. If you say, yes, tick, I'm a homeowner, it gives you a bunch of points. It gives you flexibility. It gives you credit. It gives you the ability to make decisions that you want to make when you want to make them, because you want to make them, not because of any other circumstance.
So if your perspective is, oh, real estate agents are running into a challenging situation right now because they're commission-based, they need this sale to make it work, and that's your perspective, and everybody just wants to sell you on something, well, you know what?
There are people like that. Yes, that is true. That is true. That is true.
Yeah, there are people like that. You won't find them here on screen with you, but one of our viewers put this best. You do you, right? You do you. Right? If you feel comfortable renting, if you're okay with the pros and cons, I mean, there's pros of renting as well, right? You don't like the place, go somewhere else. You don't have to pay for the depreciation of it. You don't have to pay for the, you want new appliances.
If you don't have the money,
you don't have the money, you don't have the savings. That's all good. And it's all a matter of perspective. Now, I know that I alone can't change the perspective, and it's not up to me to change your perspective. Our goal here is to present the facts, present evidence, present data, statistics, and you make the decision. That's how it's always been. And I hope for those of you who have watched this episode, you've clicked subscribe, you clicked like. If you don't like it, click the thumbs down. That's okay too. Put your comments in. Share your comments, point of view. I shared a real life example of where this is the case. And the worst thing anybody can do watching any episode or commenting on anybody, not even ours, not Robert and Johnder's show, anybody, any realtor, is making a comment, not realizing where history has, where all of this has come from. Historical data, historical stats, what could happen in the future. Nobody knows what could happen. As Robert said, it could be flat for the next decade or so. But if you own a house, yeah, you'll be paying down that mortgage and gaining equity. Nobody's going to kick you out. Yeah, you're going to have to replace your refrigerator if it breaks down, but it's your place. You can do whatever you want. Your kids will be in the schools that they want to be. You'll be growing up on a street where you love your neighbors. If you don't like your neighbors, go buy another house, right? But point is, nobody knows where things are going to be. Like, we can always that right edge of a chart is always the hardest to make a decision on, because you don't know, and yet you do know based on history. Any final words, Robert, that you'd like to share to wrap up and conclude?
No, I think we've been all around it. And I think you've got, this idea of addressing the haters is a very good point.
We love the haters too, because we love how you watch and interact with us. So hate if you hate, like if you like, but subscribe and comment and watch our next episode of Real Estate Chat, because one of your comments might turn into an episode. Thank you, everybody. Bye for now. See you next time.
Bye. Good.